Fight T, fight booty, fight O, fight blue and white. The blue I'm going fight. Yes,
Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Voice of the Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay atenista, sa loob sa labas ng eskwela, ibibida lahat ng eskwela. Kawan ni Ignacio, Katipunero, sugo, todo sa kayod, tulong at tulong, lipat na Blue Eagle, galing-giling at tigil, blue and white, one big fight. Katipunan.
Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay atenista, sa loob sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng eskwela. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Kawan ni Ignacio, Katipunero, sugod, todo sa kayod, tulong at tulong, lipat na Blue Eagle, galing-giling at gigil, blue and white, one big fight. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan. Radyo, 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 Katipunan. Radyo, Katipunan.
Meron? Ano nga ba ang meron? Paano nga bang mabuhay ng tapat sa meron? Don't you wish you can relive your philo classes? The terror teachers? The terrible oral exams? Or the even terrifying but liberating and life-changing aha moments? Lundagin mo, Beybeh! Here's your chance! Lundagin mo, Beybeh! Kasama ang mga pilosopong sina Jovi Miroy at Ron Capinding. Lundagin mo, Beybeh! Leaping upward, leaping forward. Lundagin mo, Beybeh! Leaping to greater heights, to greater wisdom, to greater magis. Lundag natin ngayon!
I think we're live. Good afternoon to everybody. It's Monday once more, and it's the time for our show Lundagin Mo Beybeh. Unfortunately, Sir Ron Kapinding is not with us this afternoon, but that is a great opportunity for us to invite a guest co-anchor, and our topic this afternoon is actually very, very exciting and interesting. It's March and it's Women's Month, and we just celebrated International Women's Day last week, last Wednesday, and uh, and so I decided to feature it this Monday. This is our Women's Month episode, and I decided that the best way to do this is to invite a co-anchor who's also a woman's advocate, aside from being a woman herself. And so our co-anchor this afternoon is none other than Camille Ortiz. She's an assistant instructor at the Department of English at Ateneo de Manila. And so she's with us now. Hi, Camille.
Hello po. Hello po. Good
Hey.
afternoon, Doc Jovi.
Ayan. So,
Happy International Women's Month.
Correct. So, do you have anyone to greet? You have anyone like to greet? Someone's listening, maybe your mom, your...
Yes, I believe my mom is listening and my dad too. So hello.
all right.
Also boyfriend ko. Hello.
Ayun, all right. So, Camille, you are teaching at the Ateneo de Manila. And how long have you been teaching?
This is my third school year teaching with the Ateneo. So happy to be here.
All right. So, how do you find the Ateneans?
Masayang turuan at marami pa akong natututunan sa pagtuturo as I teach them.
All right. So, where did you study again? Camille studied in which university?
Doon po sa kabilang side ng Katipunan sa UP Dilima.
UP Diliman. I wonder why you chose to teach English Lit.
Yeah.
You really wanted to be a teacher.
Yes po. My mom's a teacher and I was really into books ever since I was young. And really that was all that I needed to motivate myself to teach literature in college also.
All right. So as they told us when we were young teachers, so young and full of hope. All right. So our guest this afternoon, I'm very excited to interview her. She is a daughter of one of my favorite students, as he'd like to introduce himself to his children when he meets me. So it's the daughter of Martin Lichauco. So you want to introduce our guest this afternoon?
Sige, I'll introduce our esteemed guest this afternoon. So, her name is Katya Lichauco, and she is a graduate from Ateneo de Manila University with a degree in interdisciplinary studies with tracks in communication and political science and a minor in English literature. She's a writer for a digital marketing company and does freelance writing and editing on the side. She's the co-editor of Big Deal, an anthology of Filipino women's stories and art, Volume 1, and she's also a co-author and managing editor of Fearless Filipinas 2, 24 Women Who Dared to Dream. She also owns a small independent bookstore called Staff Pick. So let's give a warm welcome to Katya Lichauco.
Hi, Katya.
Hi, Camille. Hi, Doc. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Right. So where are you now? Where are you at now? Where are you streaming from?
I'm home in my little cave. Like this is my this is my writing chair, so I'm literally here all day. Yeah.
Are you still in Makati or?
Yes, I'm in Makati.
All right. You look like you're in the international You're like somewhere else.
It just staged to look like that with all my books
Alright.
behind me.
So I didn't catch it. Actually, when did you graduate, Kat?
I
Uh,
graduated in 2019, so I was the last batch to graduate in person before the pandemic. So I was very lucky.
yeah, I was asking your father why you didn't take me for your philosophy in your philosophy classes.
I was probably scared.
Skip. Why should
Legendary prof kasi.
also because it was in Filipino, I guess.
Yes, I think so.
All right. So shout out to your dad and your mom.
Yeah, shout out to my parents.
Yeah. And Renzo also.
Mhm.
No? So I'll actually let Camille do the interviewing, but I also have questions when I'll ask questions when I feel like it.
Okay.
All right. So because it's Women's Month, I think it's better that I let Camille do the interrogating. Don't interrogate. Okay.
Grabe naman yung interrogating. Hindi
Interview
naman
lang.
pa.
Interview. All right.
Parang
Okay.
orals.
Right.
Parang naman exam.
Para hindi matunog oras. Okay, all right. Sige. Camille, what's your first question?
Yeah, my first question is really all about getting to know Katya and especially her body of work. So maybe you can share with us like how did you find yourself in the space of uplifting women's voices given your work that revolves so much around your advocacy regarding empowering women, especially Filipina women. Okay, so it's kind of a long story, but it dates back to college. And I studied, as Camille mentioned, in Ateneo. I graduated with a degree in interdisciplinary studies. I took communication and political science as my tracks. And I also decided to minor in English Lit. So my love for writing really began, I think, freshman year college during my NLIT classes. That was really when I discovered that I enjoyed writing. I didn't really see any of like the assignments for the essays as like homework. I thought it was like a great way of like exercising um like what I was passionate about. And I found that it was about like women's voices and women's stories. And I actually entered Ateneo with it with like an AB psych degree, but I decided to shift to IS because of like the freedom it would give me to explore different tracks and different electives. And I had like a wonderful thesis advisor, Ma'am Marichi Guevara, and she was the one who really encouraged me to pursue writing about women's stories. So come senior year of college, when I did my thesis, it was a creative project called One Woman. It was an essay collection of creative nonfiction. So it was all essays about Filipino womanhood and my experiences there, and my different roles in life, like as a sister, as a daughter, a student, like an individual. And it was also at this time that I started reading a lot more. I was also very like bookish growing up. Like I was also very shy, so I turned to books as like an escape. And I started reading a lot more. I discovered all of these great women authors, and I was reading a lot more. And because I was reading, I was also writing on the side, and I knew that I wanted to pursue a career related to writing. But I think as any writer would know, like it's kind of hard to find your footing, especially in the beginning. Um, I did a few jobs like in digital marketing, writing SEO articles about like different topics, like literally any topic under the sun. But it was never anything that I was super passionate about. Because I was writing under like a pen name or like not having any byline whatsoever. And I really found myself like yearning to write about what I was passionate about. But I think as anyone would know also, like it's hard to find that space like in the Philippines. And so it was during the pandemic, actually, I was still doing one of my digital marketing jobs and like freelancing on the side, that one of my best friends, Yana, approached me with the idea of coming up with a project for women. And she was like, she came from a psychology background and I had my writing background, but we both had the shared passion of telling women's stories. And so she was like, what can we do? Like we had a lot of idle time. Again, this was like during the early on in the pandemic, maybe like somewhere in 2020. I think it was around September.
And so we were still pretty much home, not really going out much, but we had our FaceTime calls, and we had years and years of friendship like under our belts, like in which we discussed like our trials and tribulations as women and all of our experiences. So we decided to come up with a book of Filipino women's stories, and we decided to call it Big Deal, to reclaim the phrase, it's not that big of a deal. We one thing we noticed was that when women share stories like about their experiences, whether positive or negative, they have the tendency to undermine them and say, oh, it's not that big of a deal, even though it actually is. And we really wanted to reclaim that phrase, and we knew we couldn't do it alone also, so we decided to tap a bunch of Filipina Gen Z and millennials to contribute to our anthology. And we didn't want to limit it also, so we decided to let them contribute in any medium they were comfortable in. So we have essays, we have poems, we even have artwork, photo sets, and all of that. And so Yana and I worked very closely with these women. Some of them were people that we knew personally, and others were references, because we didn't really want to limit it to just like our own echo chambers. So we were getting references, and like a lot of the women actually we haven't even met in person, but we were working very closely with them, and we also promised to protect their stories and to keep them sacred, because after all, it was like the purpose of publishing this book. We also noticed that there was a gap in Filipino women's stories in particular. Actually, this is something I realized when I was writing my thesis. Mama Richie was always telling me that I needed more Filipino references. And I was always at the Ateneo Library of Women's Writings because it was my favorite place in college, because no one really goes there. It's very quiet, and it has this nice yeah, very nice quiet vibe. And I was looking there, and there were lots of books, but there weren't that many current ones, specifically like from my age group. And it was because of this gap that Big Deal was also born. And from there, like everything else started coming together. I really I think found my place in terms of writing. And so I had a second book from the same publisher called Fearless Filipinas 2, and this was published last year. I served as the managing editor and co-author of this book, and also a collection of essays, kind of like short biographies of different fearless Filipinas from different backgrounds. We have women in sports, entertainment, business, and the like. And it was really, I think, more geared towards younger audiences, to kind of give more young Filipinas role models that they could look up to, and encourage them to dare to dream. And so yeah, these are my two books, but they were things I was doing on the side. I was still trying to find a more regular sort of day job that I was truly passionate about. And luckily, I came across a company called Kindred Health. So it's the first Filipino women's hybrid clinic in the country. We have doctors from a bunch of different specializations. We operate both online and offline. Like our first clinic opened last December in Serendra. We also offer like immunizations and IV drips, and all things related to women's health. So like I found my people here also. And so that's what's been keeping me busy nowadays. Like the books are, I mean, any new book concept is like kind of like on hold right now, but I'm still happy to be able to produce content relating to women and serving women also, of course, in the local setting.
Wow.
Sorry, that was like a lot.
Camille?
Yeah, you mentioned like of course your passion for writing and reading about women's stories, and you mentioned also like your enduring friendship with women and your collaborative style with them. Maybe you can share with us like what your like upbringing was like in terms of like your exposure to women's stories. You mentioned this gap in the Philippine women's stories that were available to you then. Do you think that was part of the reason why you pursued this trajectory now? Like maybe you can share with us like what were the types of stories you were exposed to as a kid regarding, women and Filipino women in particular, if you were exposed to those stories?
So my background, I came from an all-girls Catholic school. So it was really quite sheltered. I'm also the only daughter. Like I only have one younger brother. And so I didn't really have an older sister to ask questions to about like complicated topics, taboo topics. And so I kind of had to figure it out on my own. Growing up, I read a lot of like, let's say Western stories. I wasn't really exposed to local literature. A lot of like my quote unquote like role models from literature were Matilda by Roald Dahl. And also I read a lot of like Judy Bloom, sorry. This really helped me like figure out experiences that are unique to women, but also very dated. Judy Bloom was like a very big back in the day, like in the 90s. And so there wasn't really anything modern. And that's really also what pushed me to explore this further. And to, if it didn't exist, I wanted to create it on my own or find people who were also passionate about doing the same thing. And so that's why I was when I began reading more like in college, I mentioned that I really got into like gender studies and women's literature. I really also tried to find more voices of women of color because a lot of like the essay collections, which is like one of my favorite genres, is a lot of them are like from the Western perspective. And so I was looking for, you know, other resources there. But there was, while there were some Asian, um, you know, titles of this sort, there weren't any like Filipinas. And I really wanted to be able to highlight that and kind of create these books and these stories that I didn't have growing up. Even if I have no younger sisters or like younger girl cousins, this was something like ideally, like if I were younger, this is what I would be wanting to read, or like my daughters one day, what these are like the kinds of books that I would want them to be exposed to, and also encourage them to write and create if, you know, if they were looking for that.
So were you like thinking women Filipinas of your age, they're not expressing themselves or they're not being heard? What was the like your friend Yan Yan, when you were talking about it, what was like during the pandemic, did you feel that there were issues that of young women that were not being addressed or not being talked about in media or even by themselves?
I don't think naman that women these days, like in the Philippines, don't have the voices or like don't feel that they have voices and that these aren't heard. But it was really more of like compiling them. And one thing that Yan and I realized was that we both, from the both of us, we both had stories to tell, and we both had a mix of good and bad experiences. And we were like, you know, it's just the two of us, what more everyone else. And growing up also, like we had heard a lot of stories like from our friends. Yana's also like the only daughter in her family. And so we kind of became each other's confidants. And um it was really that, it was creating the avenue and the space where women who had stories could contribute to. And I think also during the pandemic, we were confined in our homes, and you know, it also gave room to lots of reflection. When we, in the initial stages of planning Big Deal, we also realized that we had gone through so much, and that a lot of the things that we'd gone through, we had shrugged off in the past and said that they weren't a big deal, even if they were. And so it was really being able to create that space. Yeah, since, and then after all, we ended up becoming the editors of the book. And then we wrote the preface and like the afterword, but it was really also the work of all the women who contributed to the book, whether they decided to go anonymous or if like they wanted to include a byline. We like welcomed all of that.
Yeah, you can really see like in what you've mentioned how like your advocacy regarding feminism naturally connects with or is the origin of some your career in like writing and editing and publishing. And I'm curious, especially since you know you've written and co-authored these texts on like women leaders in our country. Like, would you maybe you can share like what do you think are the similarities or the things that they've that these different leaders shared? Like I'm looking through the
I
list
know
of
that
like
you have a picture with was it
yeah
Michelle Obama? That you have a picture.
yeah
You met
Yes.
Michelle Obama, right?
Yes, I met
yun.
Michelle Obama. It was one of the best experiences of my life.
Yeah yun. Yeah, so maybe you can share with us like what are the similarities or like the issues that really arose from the like in the sharings that you've encountered in both books. Like what are the things that like in connection to what Doc Jovi mentioned regarding like yung ano ba yung mga issues ng kababaihan, not just arising from the pandemic, but what are these unresolved issues that you've mentioned?
I think one of the biggest things that we realized when we were writing Big Deal, and also later on, like when I was doing Fearless Filipinas too, was I don't know if it was like a generational thing, but it probably is also. Like I mentioned, Yana and I, we realized that we had gone through so much, like a bunch of different experiences, but growing up, we didn't really have the language to talk about them. We both came from like sheltered all girls Catholic school upbringings, and they don't really um expose you to like the language to be able to talk about difficult realities, while they do like train you well in like putting you out into the real world. A lot of the things you have to discover like on your own, and like a lot of the language that we use to talk about difficult things, from like sexual harassment to issues like gaslighting or toxic masculinity, that comes from real experiences. And when we were looking back, and even when we were talking to a lot of our contributors, who were both like Gen Z and millennials, so kind of the same, within like the same age range. Like we had people from like their like in college, so like around 19 to like their late 20s, who contributed. And one common thing was that you could tell that they had just found like the language to talk about their experiences and to actually name them. And I think that's also so important in being able to address them, because you may have gone through something in the past and and may not have recognized that it was like a real issue. But once you find people who have gone through similar things and you're able to name them, then you can also find common ground, and it's also a weight off your shoulders in being able to talk about these things and to name them. And I think it also helps in identifying that they're actually real, and that you're not second guessing yourself, which is like something that you may have experienced in the past by not being able to name them. And I think now, like with social media, um, the discourse is also a lot richer. Like it's easier to learn about things. Like you can just Google what toxic masculinity is, and you'll find your answers right away. You'll be led to like a bunch of different articles. You know, even with what I do now, like I work in women's healthcare, and one thing that we really advocate against is like googling symptoms, because like, you know, it always leads you down like a rabbit hole, and it causes you to freak out. And so we really try to put out very educational content related to women's issues, you know, naming a bunch of different symptoms, and then that like educating people, let's say like on polycystic ovarian syndrome, which isn't commonly talked about. So being able to name things, I think, is like one of the biggest commonalities like we found when writing the book. And it's something that I continuously like learn even in my job now, the importance of that, because it really, I think, helps you get closer to like the root of the problem, and also helps you talk about things in a way that is like comfortable for you, and also helps you find people who could help you as well.
Speaking of people who can help you, and also the idea of this community where women collaborate and uplift each other, maybe you can share with us like who are your what do you call that, inspirations, or who are these iconic women that you looked up to, especially since you worked on a book that was all about like fearless Filipinas. Like I'm sure you have so much insight on like who are these current women leaders that, you know, again, what you've mentioned about focusing on like the like people who are living, women leaders who are currently alive and we can look up to and still listen to now. I think that's so important, especially as we talk about, feminism moving forward. And yeah, I'm curious to hear about, your women leaders, like who are the women that you look up to in, whatever fields that you're interested in.
So of course I'm gonna be a bit biased, and they're all writers. I was really lucky with Fearless Filipinas too. One of the women we featured is Gia Tolentino. So she's a New York Times bestselling author. She wrote the essay collection Trick Mirror, and like I had the pleasure, like the biggest privilege of writing her piece for Fearless Filipinas too. And I was in contact with her via email, and she was so kind and gracious, entertaining like all of our edits. And I really, when I read her book, I think that was like before the pandemic when it came out in 2018 or 2019. It was also just so amazing to see like a Filipina author like on the New York Times bestseller list, even if she is like Filipino American. Just seeing the name like Gia Tolentino like on shelves like in Fully Booked or like in bookstores, and even like being talked about on like the international stage. It was just super admirable for me also because she does write essays, and she talks a lot about like current problems that women face. She talks about like heroines in literature and how we're conditioned to believe in certain fairy tales like growing up when we're exposed to these sorts of books, and how women these days like create their own destinies and realize that they are more than what they were exposed to or what they know. And I was really very inspired by her book, even more so when I got to write about her. And I also got to meet her. Luckily, I was luckily when she came here on a like a small book tour, and so it was very inspiring. I guess realizing that like you could make it as a writer. Writers get a lot of like flack, and it is very difficult to find your footing in writing. I still kind of struggle with it. But yeah, she's definitely up there on my list. And another like notable mention is Roxane Gay. She's one of my favorite writers. Her book Not That Bad is also one of my favorite books, and it was actually what inspired Big Deal. So it's called Not That Bad: Dispatches from Rape Culture, and she also tapped a bunch of different writers. In this case, like they're all written work. And it's about their experiences in rape culture, and like experiences big or small. And I think that's also really what gave us the motivation to put out Big Deal, because it kind of came from the same like root cause of like women shrugging off their experiences and saying like, oh, they're not that bad when they actually are. So top of mind, it's definitely the two of them. I guess I also, since you mentioned like Michelle Obama, it was really very um it was like a huge moment being able to meet her, even if it was just for a few seconds. But yes, I am partial to the writers. But actually, all of the women that we featured in Fearless Filipinas too are so amazing. Like we have a lot of women who are younger. People like Macy Lee, who is the founder of Talang Dalisay, Tasha Tanhuco, the founder of Kids for Kids Philippines. And then we have, of course, like the big names like Cesc Rilon or like Pia Ranada. So it was just really so inspiring being able to work on this book and talk to all of these women of different age groups, and hear their stories and hear how they found their voices in whatever career path they chose to take. And of course also all the women we tapped for Big Deal. It was just really so motivating. There were many times like as we were working on the book that we were like, can we even do this? Like this is such a huge task. We even thought that we would self-publish, which was a crazy idea we had. Luckily we found a local publisher, but it was really like the bravery of our contributors that kept us going and really pushed us to see the book until the very end. We had both like an online launch in November 2021, and then we were lucky to have an in-person launch June of last year. So it was really great to celebrate the women who agreed to contribute to our book. And yeah, to really give back in that sense as well. to thank them for allowing us to do this and for trusting us to keep their story sacred, which I also think is so important when it comes to like women's stories, because a lot of times like they are very sensitive and very sacred. And that's one thing that we had to keep in mind, like as we were working on Big Deal, like we had to be sure um to protect these stories, especially the ones that were sensitive in nature. We also had to make sure that we were doing the right thing legally. We had to like consult with lawyers. We had to, that's why there were like many delays, but in the end it was more than worth it. Especially when our contributors were telling us that they were so grateful to have a space where they could finally share their stories, whether or not they chose to include their names.
So it seems that, from the context of Katya, that she came from Assumption, that what is lacking was a kind of formation language that would enable the woman no longer to look at them as, as God's little creatures, but as women, and with real life issues and real life struggles. I think that's a key word that she mentioned a while ago, the struggles, and she mentioned some of them: toxic masculinity, sexual harassment, and so it's not so much. I think these are still very basic stuff which we can discuss some more. No, in other words, you feel, Katya, that when you were growing up, you didn't have anyone, you didn't have the tools to express or to talk about these things, or anyone to talk to about them. Is it, how did you feel about that when you were growing up, when you had no one to talk to about these issues? Was it because the women that were close to you were also afraid to talk about them, or did they say what you were saying? Oh, that's not such a big deal anyway. Why are you so bothered by it? What was the how did you feel about when you were growing, not finding the language to be able to talk about these things?
I think that like when I was younger, it wasn't something I was very aware of. Like I wasn't like, oh no, I don't have anyone to talk to. Like I don't know what this means. I don't know what that means. But I was very close to my mom. So like if I did have, I am very close to my mom. So if I do have like a concern, like I ask her, I confide in her. But I think in terms of like not having the language or not knowing who to turn to at that time, it wasn't something I was like acutely aware of. It's really only something I realized now that I am able to talk about these things, and now that I do have the language, it really stems from that gap that I didn't have, and that a lot of women maybe like my age didn't have growing up.
Would
So
you
it wasn't,
would you
sorry.
recommend that that gender studies be taught in high school, for example, or it be part of
Yes, I completely agree. Actually, um, as I was working on my thesis, I mentioned to Ma'am Marishi, my thesis advisor, like we don't have it also as like a course at Ateneo. There are like a few electives on like gender and literature that I was able to take. I also took during my term abroad. Um, but like there's no gender studies course, and if there was, I probably would have taken it or shifted to it. But I think definitely it would be beneficial to have this like as early as high school, because that's really before you go out into the world in college, it would be very beneficial and helpful to have this sort of background. um yeah, it's probably one of like the things on my bucket list is to be able to teach gender studies, or to teach like something related to gender and literature, because I think that's like the intersection, or like the interdisciplinary studies major in me, like trying to find like the connections. But I think one day I really would like to teach that, whether it's like workshops for young aspiring writers, or like an actual class on like contemporary novels and feminism and writing. So all of those different things like intersecting, I think are so important, and are also like a good interesting way of like angling gender studies, because I think it could be like, I mean, I don't think a lot of people would be so keen on taking it unless it was like an elective. But to like require it, while it is ideal, I don't know like how willing people would be to like jump on it, especially like um if they have no initial exposure to it. Yeah.
Right. Camille, are you able to relate to what Kat is saying? Did you have a similar experience?
I think for me it's because we have a different upbringing. Like Katya has a brother. Ako naman we're both girls. I have a sister, and for me like to live like it feels very sheltered. But then when I studied in a co-ed school, so it is a different experience of being a girl, because like what Katya mentioned, like once you gain the language for describing these situations, you do have a better understanding of, what it means to be a young woman in the Philippines. Like, for example, one of the things that comes to mind, like when you think about being the responsible one, like when you're a girl, like, and you're, for example, you're in a group, and there it seems like you're already given the task of being the automatic, okay, you have to be the one responsible for things because you're the girl and you're supposed to be more emotionally mature than everyone else in the group. So it's those little things, like I am so grateful and fortunate to not have to had faced like such pressing concerns earlier on. But we do see, I think, like especially in our experiences, that the language for things like toxic masculinity or emotional labor, or these small nuances do add to the what do you call that, the inequality that women face on a daily basis. I mean, hindi pa nga ito yung lumalabas dun sa confines ng school. Of course, like when you get out of the classroom, like there are things like catcalling, sexual harassment, all of those things. And yeah, definitely agree with what Katya mentioned regarding, gaining the language to describe women's issues is such a big deal. And it's so important also, not just for us to create to create spaces for us to talk about these things, but also to dig deep into what others have discussed or have shared about these issues. And yeah, really yeah, I think that's what I wanted to share about, of
Yeah.
course, like growing up and
But I
finding these
wonder if
things.
Katya was aware that from 2016, we had this kind of context, also political context, that was also not very conducive to women, or was actually very discriminatory. Was But of course, it was really more the pandemic that triggered the writing of the essays, right? But were you aware of that yourself, even when you were still young in 2016, that context?
Yes, actually, so yeah, I actually started voting in 2016. That was like the year like luckily, it was like my first time to vote. And so I was exposed to it, like I think more acutely like from then onwards. And I also took up, well, like political science as like one of my tracks in IS. And of course, like in Ateneo, they do expose you to like the realities beyond the confines of like the classroom, talking about like current issues. And luckily also in my course in IS, they kind of train you for thesis with a junior thesis, and you get to work with like a group or like a partner. And I also found a classmate who was very passionate about women's issues, and we talked a lot about the presidency at that time. Our thesis was like on hashtag activism, and so we were also kind of compiling different tweets and posts from social media that went against like our ideals and like our beliefs in relation to like things that Duterte would say, or things about women in the news. And we also highlighted what hashtag activism meant, like in today's day and age, how women can find their communities online and be able to resonate with one another and talk about difficult issues and like realities that are going on, whether in the news or in their personal lives. And so I think it was also really that pushed me to notice these things that were happening, and to realize also that there was such a big gap in like representation. And just because like there's a woman like in a certain position doesn't necessarily mean that change is happening. Of course, like it has to be sustainable and has to be ongoing. That's why even like when it is Women's Month, you see all of these like companies like posting about it being Women's Month, and it's like very it's kind of like tokenism, but it's not like a sustainable thing that happens like every single month, like year long. And I think that's also something that yeah, I realized from, I guess, college onwards, that there are so many issues and there's so many things, there's so much ground to cover. And I think it's also being able to like create these platforms and avenues where we can talk about these things and like air out our grievances, talk about the news, talk about what's happening, and talk about how we feel about these things without being discriminated or judged. Well, even if like that is unavoidable, of course, when it comes to something controversial. Yeah.
Yeah, Katya, you mentioned again social media as a space to, encourage women to speak their mind and also to find their own communities. And maybe you can share with us, especially since your work now deals so much with social media and women's health. Like, what are the newer issues that you find are coming in our like 2023 context? Like, do you find like there are newer things coming out that sort of influence the way that we see women's issues, or actually are one like a new variants of women's issues that are coming to light because of how social media has been evolving in the past few years?
Well, I've been working in women's health since September of last year. And so that's really like what I'm mostly exposed to like on a day-to-day basis. And there's so many things that I've learned in like the short span of time that I've been at Kindred. And I guess like top of mind, it's going to be issues related to women's health. Like women go through so many unique challenges in terms of their health. And there's like this term called medical gaslighting, which I only learned in this job, about like how women are like disbelieved or their symptoms are dismissed solely because like their experiences that only women go through. And I think that this is something that, I mean, has existed for some time now, but because of social media, because of like the internet, women are able to look for communities online and look for resources to educate themselves and also the people around them about their unique experiences, talking about difficult topics like miscarriages or PCOS or endometriosis, which are issues that have existed since like forever. But it's only now that we have the language and we have the spaces and the avenues to talk about them that they're really highlighted. And also being able to work in content related to women's health, that we're able to educate people, specifically like Filipinas, and to also provide them with like the services that they need to get to like the bottom of whatever symptoms they have, whatever underlying health issues that they have that which may have been dismissed in the past. I think it's really that. And also yeah, I have nothing else to add. It's really that.
Before we go on, your dad says, "That's my daughter. So proud of you."
I can actually see him messaging, but I'm not checking my phone because I might get distracted.
Alright. Now, one thing I noticed, however, is that during like in the 80s and the 90s, it was more about what's this? Women finding like having the space to work and be mothers as well. So it's that women no longer have to be confined to the home.
Mhm.
But listening to Katya, it seems that the issue is different now. It's just like I don't think that's one of the issues that you guys are still facing. That you don't see yourselves being confined to the home anymore. That you don't have any other choice but to be housewives. But it seems that how will you articulate that issue, Camille? It's like there's no space and the tools by which to talk about what Katya calls sensitive topics. Am I articulating it clearly, Kat
Yeah.
or Camille?
Yeah, I think like of course like from the in our current context, I feel like because again, so much of social media is liberating people, again, to give people the language to talk about these issues, there are more spaces for women to discuss these matters. And there seems, because again of the education that comes with the internet, there are more like women are being educated on like options that were previously not available to them.
Yeah.
So ayun, parang, but then again, that still doesn't like diminish the fact that of course we come from we are in very privileged spaces. To be able to have like these options and to be aware of these options is already a big deal. Like it's already it seems more of a privilege than it is something that is given to women in general. So I think definitely like there are like these issues continue to persist, maybe in spaces that we are not necessarily a part of anymore. But I feel like now like the conversation is not just about finding a space in the home and finding a space at work, but also like who gets to choose these options. Like, do other women also have the options to even have a choice of work or to be able to stay at home? So ayun, so I'm not sure if I'm articulating it as well as Katya did, but yeah, I hope at least from how I see it, like it's not like there are more options because we have so many options now given the information handed to us by social media and the internet, but there are still certain spaces that are not permeated by this privilege to choose.
Do you sense that, Kat, that actually social media allows young girls or young women to be able to talk about the sensitive issues? Or
I think definitely one thing that I realized, I think maybe in high school and in college, actually maybe more of like in college, was I think it's also means not just to like talk about your experiences, but to also educate other women or like warn them. I'm on Twitter a lot actually, so I read a lot of like bite-sized news or like threads, and a lot of women come forward and talk about, like, let's say someone who harassed them, and let's say this person is a public figure who's well known, like let's say in the Philippines, and it kind of serves as like a warning to like any other woman who encounters this person. But I think one thing that is scary is that social media can be a double-edged sword. um as much as like you want to like rush to, let's say, a site like Twitter or like a public forum where you can talk about things that you've experienced, you can also get like harassed for it. People will
Backlash.
come after you, you'll get the backlash.
Mhm.
You can also be sued for cyber libel, which is something
Yeah.
we should really be careful about when we are working on Big Deal. And even personally, like with my own experiences of sexual harassment, it's always very tempting to turn to all of these like social media platforms and to like expose a person or like talk about these things. But at the same time, like you also have to think about, like, take a step back and like think of like how to protect yourself as well. So it's very like complicated to navigate sometimes because the line is like very, very fine. But yeah, I think that's like one of the biggest things about like social media in terms of like women's issues, that you can find like communities, which is super great and really helpful sometimes, especially if you have no one else to turn to. But at the same time, yeah, there are things like cyber libel and like harassment that also exist at the same time.
Mhm.
they can turn on you as well when you
Mhm.
expose them.
Yeah. I think like what I get from
That's
what
an entire manual. It seems that, Camille, there's
yeah,
an entire manual that's
yeah,
required for,
just
how
to
to deal with these things. If you're
yes.
feeling, you have no one to
Mhm.
confide in, what do you
Mhm.
do, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess what I'm getting from what Katya shared regarding like these issues is that it's not really just an individual matter anymore. Like can't just stop at, representation. And I think you mentioned earlier again, like these problems are systemic. And I guess with that comes my question regarding, leadership and institutions in the Philippines. And what do you think is, the status of women leaders in the Philippines? Like we have several, like you've highlighted several in your book, but from an institutional angle, do you feel like our country has already reached that space wherein, women leaders can get far ahead and tackle these institutional concerns head on? Or do you feel like we have so much more to go?
Before Katya answers, I have an anecdote to share. You know Yael Camino, right? You know Yael Camino. So I asked Yael, "Oh, Yael, what do you think? All your assumptionistas are becoming leaders." "Yes, sir, but between GMA and Lauren."
Odds aren't looking so good.
So going back to the question of
I think we had currently, like, there definitely really is a long way to go. Just because a woman is in a position of power doesn't necessarily mean that there
Yeah.
is like meaningful change happening.
Yes.
I think we got a pretty good glimpse of it last year.
Yeah.
During the campaign, you saw,
Mhm.
I mean, like nationwide, people were coming together, and finally, like, it seemed like there was a huge glimmer of hope. It felt concrete, it felt real. I went to a rally, and
Mhm.
I had experienced nothing like it ever in my lifetime. And just holding on to like that feeling of hope, even though, it didn't turn out the way that we wanted it to,
Yeah.
is very, it's a good sign that we could be heading in that direction. But I think a lot more change does need to be done.
Yeah.
And, but I think it was really a really good starting point to
Mhm.
that. And I think, like, yes, definitely systemically, it is an issue. We have all of these great women who are in different careers and in different industries. And there
Yes.
is like a lot of hope seeing that too. You have women in leadership roles in different companies, starting new ventures in NGOs and things like that, which is also why I don't like the term girl boss, because I find it to be
Yes.
very like cheesy. And also,
Reductive.
who says that, like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, like that a boss,
Yeah.
like when you say boss, like, of course, like maybe the way that you're like conditioned to think is that you'll imagine like a man, but of
Mhm.
course, like these days, like it could be a woman too. Like the CEO of my company is a woman, and we don't call her like a girl boss or anything. Like, it's just, I think there is like a long way to go, but based on like what we have right now, we're slowly but surely getting there. And also, it just brings me a lot of hope knowing that, like, younger women, and like the next generations, the women who will hopefully be reading like Fearless Filipinas too, will also be inspired to realize that they could dare to dream, which is like the subtitle of the book, and to pursue not necessarily like leadership roles in government, but any role that could help them serve whatever it is that they're passionate about or what they advocate for, no matter what industry it is, and to populate these roles and like allow women to sort of finally like reclaim their like long sought after places in society. But yeah, I think that's that's what I think about it right now.
Can I ask a controversial question? You may choose not to answer it if you, because some people are saying now that the actual person behind the power is either Liza Marcos or Amy Marcos. Do you think that is the kind of a change in the culture, or is it the same kind of mentality that is going around with regard to women in power? Uh,
um
Either of you can yeah. That.
Camille, do you want to go ahead?
Sige.
You've heard of that.
Yeah.
You've heard of people saying,
Yeah.
Yes,
the real
yes.
Yeah.
the real
Like
power are either
simi-
Lisa or
similar to the previous Marcos administration,
Yeah.
where it was said that it was a conjugal dictatorship. Yeah, I think like women in leadership roles means that these people mean well, not just for women, but for the country itself. So, I mean, while it is interesting that they are said to be in these roles, the question is the leadership ultimately uplifting the marginalized sectors of our community? So I guess like what Katya mentioned earlier about representation and the limits of representation, like it's not just enough to have a women leader as a token to sort of inspire other women. I think at the end of the day, leadership, not just women leadership, because again, the progress that we want to happen requires the cooperation not just of women but of everyone in our community. I think the question is, are we uplifting the people in the margins, and are we representing what is true, and what do you call that, empowering people to be good citizens. So yeah, so that's my
I actually followed the FB page of Mrs. Marcos, the second Mrs. She's her role are still very traditional, like culture.
yeah, food. I believe in hospitality. Yeah. It's very interesting. But yeah, go ahead, Katya.
Kat,
Yeah, I think
yes, Kat, go on.
No, sorry, Doc. Yes.
I was gonna ask, is running for office in the horizon? There's a
Sometimes I
Lichauco
get
in Makati, right? There's a Lichauco.
yes. She's
That's your
yes, we're related distantly though. And my lola, my late grandmother, Josie Lichauco, my dad's mom, she was also very active. She served under I think it was FVR's presidency.
yes.
Yes. Okay. I don't want to get that wrong. So sometimes I do get asked, like my parents have asked me if it was something I'd be interested in, but honestly, I don't think that like it's my I don't think it's for me. I think I can choose other ways to serve and to like lead, but not in such a grand setting. Also, it's just not really in my personality. But I would want to like start something of my own maybe one day, like I mentioned earlier, whether it's like writing workshops for young aspiring writers or women, or also like an organization, being able to talk to young girls from like different backgrounds who've gone through different experiences. I think that's something more up my alley and something that will really allow me to exercise my strengths. I can't imagine myself in government, hanggang student government lang, but only in high school, not even in college. So yeah.
Yeah.
interesting. But we'll never know.
We'll see.
All right. So between your mom and dad, who is the more political one? Who's the more like kind of mayor? I think your dad's like a
It's 18 hours.
mayor.
My dad is very like, he's like Mr. Congeniality. So like whenever I'm with him and we're out, like he's always like saying hi to people. Actually, he's like the type to run for office. My mom and I are more similar in the sense that like we prefer to be like on not the sidelines, but like working, I guess, like behind the scenes. I guess like if you were to like make a comparison, like my mom and I would be maybe like the script writers, or like the speech writers, and my dad would be like the one like giving the speech.
The power behind the throne. All right. So we can ask the like, what is your final question? What are your final questions, Camille?
Okay, maybe as a way to end on a very positive note, like what motivates you to pursue, especially, a career that, as you've mentioned, you're still navigating at the moment as a young woman leader yourself. What are your motivations, or maybe you can share with us, like, what do you think?
It's such a feat to be able to be productive during the pandemic.
Exactly. Like, it is amazing.
Still
So,
wanted to lie down.
definitely. So, yeah, like, what do you think is what does the future hold for like women in our country, and maybe you can share with us like what motivates you to pursue especially this career that centers women.
I was lucky to, even though I didn't have like a lot of, I mean, I don't have any sisters or like women close in age related to me. I did grow up with like a lot of strong women role models, like from my mom to both of my grandparents who have both such strong personalities. I think they really, even if I didn't know it at that time, um are the ones who really pushed me to be where I am these like today. um like I'm constantly inspired by their strength and like their tenacity, and seeing them go through or having gone through what they did as women, like in different time periods, like with my mom and both of my grandparents, just both of my grandmothers, seeing that and being able to witness that and know that I'm from the same like mold has also motivated me to be where I am today. And one thing I'm also really grateful for is that my parents have always encouraged me to speak my mind. They've never stopped me from like being political or talking about difficult issues, even though a lot of other people may be embarrassed by them or consider them taboo. I never felt like I was restricted in that sense. And I feel like it's because I'm not restricted in that sense and because it's something I'm passionate about. It's like, what else is going to stop me from doing this? And it feels like I'm finally where I have always wanted to be. Like I've always, been a bit conflicted about where I was going to end up. I knew I wanted to write, but I was also passionate about women's empowerment and women's stories. And I was always like, I'm a worrywart, so I was always wondering like, where am I gonna end up? Where will I find the intersection between these two things? And now that I finally found it, and it's work that's fulfilling and work that I know will help other people, like the next generation of young Filipinas. That's really what also motivates me. And I think um working on these books and also being able to connect with women, like from our launches and talking to all of these amazing Filipino women is really what inspires me to keep going. And also, yeah, like I mentioned, like thinking about the next generation and being able to create work, being able to create books, content, and all of these things that could help the next generation and provide them with things I didn't have when I was growing up. I think is something like motivation in itself. And it's something that I know I'm going to continue doing in whatever maybe like alternative field I end up in. But I know that it'll always go back to writing and women's empowerment, whether it's like in the academe or anything else. Like if I decide to like start my own organization or company, I know that all roads lead back to that. And I guess when you know that it feels right and it's so fulfilling, and you know that you're able to help other people as well, that's all I could ever really ask for.
Now I'm hesitating to say whether the Sanggunian or I wonder do our students have an organization just for women's issues? Has there ever been an org or a desk at the Sanggunian on women's
I
issues?
think there's a gender hub, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
there's a gender hub, and I believe there's also Sangguniang arm for issues specific
Yeah.
to
So I was going to say maybe they should invite Kat, and then they
yes.
can talk about the books and wave the flag of the School of Humanities.
Yes, I'm a very, very proud humanities graduate.
Right. So I'm so happy that you agreed to talk to us, and I learned a lot because these are the things that the students don't talk about with me, especially, right? So, and now I have a clue of as to what they're thinking and feeling when it comes to women's issues. So I'm so happy that we talked to you, and Camille also. You did very well, and
Thank you.
and I know it's really very difficult to talk about these issues, And one thing I was going to say a while ago was that during my time, feminist was really, like Gabriela feminist, like Ma'am Lulu feminist, But Katya, I was wondering why you're not that kind of feminist. You're not like this rah 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 feminist.
I'm also very shy. So, I well, if you meet me like in person, like I don't shy away from like talking about these things. But I'm also like as a person, I'm very introverted. So I guess that's also why I ended up becoming a writer. Um,
I was going to say that it will be a pity if you stop writing.
yes, yes. But
But
like
you're a very good speaker, and very inspiring as well. You speak from your heart and very intelligent.
thank you, Doc. It really meant a lot being on the show. I don't know why it didn't occur to me that it would be live streamed. So I got a bit nervous, but I'm always super happy to talk about what I'm passionate about,
Yeah.
and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have guested on your show. It feels like a full circle moment. Also, even if you weren't my professor, you were my dad.
It's okay. You're already my granddaughter. All right. So that brings to a close our episode on Women's Month. And Camille, you want to say goodbye to our guests and our listeners? Maybe this is the start of something big for you.
So thank you again, Katya, for sharing with us your insights on what it means to be a young woman in the Philippines today, like your experiences as a writer, and definitely we hope to maybe someday see you along the halls of the School of Humanities. Like we
Yeah.
don't know.
I'm almost
Yeah,
sure
but-
to invite you.
yeah. Maybe like that's one of the things that you can consider like you're considering in your future. So we hope to see you in the halls of the Ateneo once again, maybe as a speaker to share again your insights on what it means to be a young woman today, and to inspire others like you who are also maybe not as aware of these issues. So thank you for that, Katya, and thank you also, Doc Toby, for having me here this afternoon.
I'll count on you in the future when we talk about women again. All right. So thanks, Katya. And this has been Joby Roy wishing you happy Women's Month and Lundagin mo Beybeh. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doc, thank you, Camille. It was so nice to meet you.
Meron? Ano nga ba ang meron? Paano nga bang mabuhay ng tapat sa meron? Don't you wish you can relive your philo classes? The terror teachers? The terrible oral exams? Or the even terrifying but liberating and life-changing aha moments? Lundagin mo, baby! Here's your chance! Lundagin mo, baby! Kasama ang mga pilosopong sina Jovi Miroy at Ron Capinding. Lundagin mo, baby! Leaping upward, leaping forward. Lundagin mo, baby! Leaping to greater heights, to greater wisdom, to greater magis. Lundag na Ateneo!
Radyo, 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 radyo.